In a world that thrives on noise, constant conversations, buzzing phones, music echoing from every corner, it often feels like speaking louder and faster is the only way to be noticed. Many people confuse volume with power, words with wisdom, and noise with meaning. Yet, the true strength of a person is sometimes found not in how much they say, but in the quiet moments where they choose to listen, reflect, and understand. Aarav was the kind of young man who believed that words were everything. In school, he always had something to say. He answered questions before others could, interrupted in debates, and carried arguments late into the night at home, thinking that being louder meant being smarter. For years, this became his identity. People expected him to be the talker, the one who always had an opinion ready, the one who filled the silence with sound. But as Aarav grew older, he began to notice something that disturbed him deeply. Though people let him speak, they rarely valued his words. His classmates nodded politely, but they followed someone else's advice. His friends laughed at his stories but turned elsewhere for guidance. Even at work, his colleagues allowed him to dominate conversations, yet the final decisions were almost always made by the quieter people in the room. This realization gnawed at him. If he was saying so much, why wasn't he being heard? One evening, while complaining to his grandmother about how unfair life was, she gently interrupted him. "Son, sometimes the loudest voice in the room is the weakest. Real strength is not in how much you speak, but in how much you listen before you speak." Aarav brushed it off at first. In his mind, the modern world rewarded those who shouted the loudest. Silence, he thought, was weakness. But life has its own way of proving wisdom right. Some months later, Aarav's company invited a guest speaker, a man named Mr. Karen, known as a legend in the business world. Aarav expected him to walk in and give a powerful speech filled with energy and authority. But when Mr. Karen entered the room, something unexpected happened. He didn't start speaking right away. He simply stood still, calm and composed, making eye contact with everyone in the room. The silence stretched on for a minute, maybe two. At first it felt uncomfortable, but soon the room became still, almost magnetic. Everyone leaned forward, waiting. And then, when he finally spoke, his words were slow, deliberate, and very few. Yet each sentence struck deep. Each word carried weight. It wasn't noise that moved the audience, it was presence. Aarav was fascinated. After the session, he approached Mr. Karen and asked the question burning in his mind. "Sir, how do you make people listen to you with so few words?" The man smiled and said, "Silence is not the absence of words. Silence is the presence of thought. People listen to you when they feel you have listened first. Quietness gives your words power." That night, Aarav couldn't sleep. He replayed those words in his head again and again. For the first time, he realized that his constant talking had made his words cheap. Because he spoke without listening, people saw his voice as background noise. He decided to change, though he knew it would not be easy. The next day, he began small. In meetings, instead of jumping in first, he listened. He let others finish, observed their points, and only then offered his perspective. At home, he let his parents and siblings speak without interrupting. With his friends, he stopped trying to win arguments and started asking questions instead. At first, silence felt uncomfortable, almost unbearable. His mind screamed with things he wanted to say, but he forced himself to hold back. And slowly, something amazing happened. People started noticing him differently. In meetings, when he finally spoke, his colleagues leaned in to listen because his words were fewer but sharper and more thoughtful. His managers began to value his input because it was no longer rushed, but considered. At home, his family felt truly heard, and the endless arguments turned into meaningful conversations. With friends, his presence became calming, and people began seeking his advice rather than avoiding his noise. Aarav realized that silence was not emptiness. Silence was space. space for reflection, for wisdom, and for connection. He also discovered something even deeper. In silence, he started hearing himself. Away from the constant need to talk, he became aware of his thoughts, his emotions, his dreams. He noticed how often he had spoken out of insecurity, using words to hide fear of being ignored. Now, in silence, he realized that respect is not demanded by volume. It is earned through presence. Months passed, and the change in Aarav was undeniable. His career began to grow as people trusted his judgment. His relationships improved because he was no longer trying to dominate, but to understand. Most importantly, he discovered peace within himself. He no longer feared silence. He embraced it. He found his true voice not in the noise of endless words, but in the quiet strength of listening, observing, and speaking with intention. Years later, when people described Aarav, they no longer called him the boy who never stopped talking. They called him a man of few words, but words that mattered. He had learned the art of being quiet, not as a weakness, but as a powerful way of living. And so, the boy who once thought that only the loudest voices were heard discovered the truth. Silence is not the absence of voice. Silence is where the real voice is born. For it is in quietness that thoughts take shape, wisdom grows, and words gain the power to touch hearts.